There we go. Hello and welcome. Welcome to our Lunch and Learn today. My name is Renee Miller. I'm the program director at the OBI, and we're glad to have you with us in person with lunch and on Zoom. So let's just go ahead and get started. So I wanted to let everybody know that this Lunch and Learn is about public relations and thought leadership for life science startups. And so if you are here for that topic, you are in the right place. And this program is also being recorded. So I would like to click to the next slide. Okay, and read this land acknowledgement. Otrati would like to acknowledge the land we are all on, wherever we may be. Otrati conducts business throughout Portland and beyond and is making an effort to acknowledge the history of the area and work toward decolonization of the bioscience industry. Portland rests on traditional village sites of the Multnomah, Cathlamet, Clackamas, Chinook, Tualatin, Kalapuya, Molalla, and many other tribes who have made their homes along the Columbia River. So please join us in acknowledging the land we're all on throughout Portland and beyond. To learn more about Portland's native, diverse, and vibrant community, please read Leading with Tradition, a document created by the Portland Indian Leaders Roundtable. And there will be a link to it in the chat. All right. Now I have the pleasure of introducing our guest today, Eric Schudiske. Hope I pronounced that correctly.
You did very well.
Awesome.
It took me years.
I'm going to read his bio real quick, and then I'm going to hand it over to him so he can tell you about this fascinating topic. Eric's career focuses on translating complex subjects into compelling stories. Should I talk louder? Okay, I will. As a TV news journalist who knows how to project, unlike me, for more than a decade, he reported live while embedded with search and rescue during hurricanes. He shook hands with the Dalai Lama, and he earned a personal collection of White House press passes. He's a frequent speaker discussing public relations trends in life sciences and impact technology communities. He leads S2S public relations practice, which serves clients in the medical device, therapeutics, AI drug discovery, and clean tech innovation spaces with an integrated earned, owned, and social media approach. He secured placements in the Wall Street Journal, Yahoo Finance, Reuters, and other major publications. So Eric, please go on ahead. I'm going to move this podium out of the way.
Great.
And just let me know when to forward the slides.
Great. Thank you so much, Renee. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I feel a little like, fortunately for those at home, you don't get to experience the lunch theater that's occurring here. Or maybe not, unfortunately, but I do want to thank everyone for being here today. I'm excited to talk about this topic because it's what we live and breathe every day at S2S Public Relations. And just a little backup there, S2S Public Relations, not a droid, but it means C to Series or Series A to Series B. So most of our clients are venture-backed impact technologies. So we're very familiar with how we integrate our earned and owned media strategy to try to drive awareness and also reach business goals, primarily among investors to advance funding for our clients. So we can move on just a little bit about me. You've heard, so we're going to run quickly through that. So founder, so I really felt passionate about bringing this incarnation of my vision for serving the life sciences and impact community to life about 5 years ago. I founded this firm to work specifically with those venture-backed impact technology companies and directly with founders and CEOs in this space to help realize their vision. You know, our job is to take the complex and turn it into compelling, and we do that every day across earned media, which is media placements, also thought leadership pieces, so writing on behalf of our clients and helping them exercise their vision, and then applying that across social media to achieve business goals. So familiar with pronouncing and projecting my voice as a former TV journalist, and mostly in Seattle, but also throughout the US. And I have my email scattered throughout this presentation, so should I address something and you want a quick answer, always feel free to send an email my way and I'll be quick to respond. And then the next slide will be a little bit about our company. There's currently a small team of us, about 6 of us, that work not only on the public relations side, but how we begin engagements typically is with a messaging refresh. So what's your vision? How are we making sure we communicate that across all your channels so that when a reporter or an investor or a potential partner or potential teammate looks at your site, they see a message that's coherent across not just your emails, but across what they see online and that's discoverable. So we're going to dig into this really quickly. I want to cover 5 points in our conversation today. And I do hope it's a conversation. So if you're online, if you want to drop something in chat, we'll make sure we address that. If you're here in person, please raise a hand and ask a question as it occurs. Very happy to make sure that this is less of a presentation and more of a conversation. So why PR? Why activated? We want to kind of cover those bases. Building a strategic foundation. Before we even exercise PR, we want to do a little bit of going to the PR gym. So we'll talk through what that means for you. Understanding your audience is something that we also want to address. And then once you understand your audience, which is typically a journalist, how do we pitch them and how do we prepare for the media interviews? And finally, in an ideal world, we've got that media interview, but we want to make sure we bring it out. We don't want it to be a moment in time. We want it to be a library book that we can check out again and again and again and achieve more value and more value from that placement. So what is PR and why activated? If you are quick and you're reading the slides, I have a quote that I truly believe PR isn't about optics, it's about owning your story. If you're not telling your story, someone else is telling your story. There's ways that you can weaponize PR, and unfortunately for startups particularly, there's going to be an industry leader that's telling a story that's not inclusive of your vision of that industry. So we want to make sure that you're out there, you're discoverable as well. And how do we realize PR, this owning of your story? You see a few examples up here on the screen. That could be on social media. We often will coach CEOs and founders, make sure that they record a video of themselves, telling their story of their vision, make sure that's on social. There's media pickups, which you see if you're looking at your screen on the right. We want to make sure we place those in high visibility, very strategic placements. And then there's thought leadership pieces. The Ophthalmology Times piece is a blog that we worked with a client on to make sure that that was placed in a publication that made sense to them, but had a very significant point of perspective that we're able to exhibit online. And then this is the library book thesis, once you achieve media, make sure that it's discoverable. That bottom banner is from one of our clients and where they've been placed in the media. So why activated? It does everything that investors want you to do with your technology, which is to validate and de-risk. You have a third-party arbitrator, a journalist, review that, tell a story of your technology. That does everything that you want investors to check off as well. That's that validation and de-risk. So the why activate, something that we've just in the past 2 years have realized is a great value add for PR, especially in this market, is talent recruitment. So we see that more and more as a primary objective for clients that come to work with us, because they want to attract the brightest minds, the most talented people in their industry, and they can't do that if you're not telling their story. Not sharing the vision. So we see our resumes for jobs. We see direct causality between LinkedIn posts and engagement for potential positions that they come with. We know that there's a really good sense of not just broader awareness, but very strategic for people that you want to drive the success of your team. This also really helps align investors. You put out a thesis, you write 300 words about why your technology is the technology to advance your industry. You can bring investors, your colleagues, teammates, potential partners in line with where you're headed in the strategic direction. And then, backing up into what you see in the Steepwire story, building that awareness and validation and de-risking. Always positive. The bigger the spotlight on you, the more that you can scrutinize, the better that looks. So now that we talked about what PR does, before you even start, you need to lay some foundation. Because we know that more than 60% of reporters, before they will even approach a startup, will want to look at their social media. They want to see how active they are. The fear is, and we hear this from reporters that we work with pretty consistently, is startups, as we all know, have a pretty high attrition rate. So they don't want to write a story on you and then 6 months later find out that you're no longer operational. So there has to be some sense that you have this momentum and you have this very strong inertia moving in the right direction. So we want to make sure that we're establishing the baseline. This is where the thought leadership is really going to come into play. And this is a very quick course. But you can pull out pieces that make sense to you. And this is meant to be a very hands-on DIY approach. So this is the playbook, and you get to decide how you want to exercise that to move your startup or your vision forward. So there's that strategic content piece, activation of social, and then engaging in conversations that matter. From go to when we potentially want to pitch media, we usually try to leave 2 to 4 weeks. So this isn't a huge runway, but we want to establish some sense of online, some connectivity with the wider world around here. On the next one. So this is establishing the baseline. This is the part that hurts the most. Because this is like going to the gym the first day and then having that next morning. Because you're going to want to understand yourself and understand your landscape. What you see up there is the oracle at Delphi in Greece. And on that oracle, it says, know thyself. So we're going to do an exploration into you and your industry to help establish where is that white space? What conversations aren't being told? Where can you become involved in the industry itself? And our suggestion, so if you're playing along at home, is to use DuckDuckGo, because it's not going to pull your previous search records. It's not going to track you through, and you're going to get some pretty honest results. So there's 3 areas that we want you to look at when you're establishing this baseline. Next slide, thank you. So you want to broadly search your vertical. You know, who's in this space? Who's making news? What are they saying? Then you want to search your founding team and you as a CEO, establish that baseline. Where are you showing up? Because we know, just like what happened when my mom found out I had a company, you know, they're going to Google you. They're going to see what shows up. So we want to make sure that what shows up is a story you want to be present, and how it stack ranks against your industry vertical is important. So you're going to search your competitors and their leadership. And this will help us, the next slide, thank you. This will help us establish where is that vacuum that you can fill with your perspective. What does your technology have that no other technology has in that space? And founders will go through these exercises constantly when building pitch decks. So you most likely have much of this material already identified. How are you differentiated? And then that becomes a talking point for you to exercise across media. And then what we also understand is so many CEOs are not active. So many founders are not active on social. So if you put a little effort there, you can outmaneuver some of your competitors just by being more present in the conversations, which means something to investors and potential partners and potential colleagues on your team. So we've done already a lot of gym work on the PR side. We've established some searches. We have a baseline. Now we're going to do some Google alerts. We're going to see, on this, the last one point on the previous slide, which is just fine, but we can go back. Building media monitoring through Google alerts. Put a Google alert for your company, put a Google alert for yourself. We want to know where you're showing up. And this will come up once or twice, and it's going to save you. If you get mentioned in a media story about the top 10 X startups in Y industry vertical, and that's something that you might not have been aware of, because it might be an obscure publication, it might not be in the US, but it's listed you, it's found you, and that's something you can amplify on social. So we're going to build those Google alerts for you, your company, and your competitors. That's going to just help you understand the space that you're in a more proactive way. It's also lazier. We're okay with that. So it's going to give you that alert every day, or how often you decide, so you can decide how often you want to understand that information. Right. And okay, so this is the thought leadership piece. This is building your discoverable story. So we've already established where that white space is, where that vacuum is that you need to fill. How are you differentiated? How can you help tell that story? So we often encourage founders to post a why video, write a why statement. This is something that can live on your website. This can go in a pitch deck. It pays off in 100 different ways, but it's important for you to exercise that vision in a very public way. We see it missing for most websites. We see it, most startups don't do this, but it's great for investors to understand. It's great for people who come to your website to see and understand. And if they can see you, this is scary, but if they can see you tell that story and see how earnest you are and see how much you want to drive impact, that means something. That has some value to it. So we often will encourage founders or CTOs to get online, record a video, we coach them through it. But the key with all of these items is that statement I'd encourage you to write is 200 to 300 words. The video is 30 seconds to a minute. You know, we want to make sure that we're economic with our time and have a high, we say, word to point ratio. And then you want to make sure that after you go through this discovery process, that shows up on your website. That the language that you've come up with here is something that you're very public and proud about. And then we want to make sure we're engaging in conversation. So on your website, make sure you encourage people to subscribe to a newsletter, be engaged with you. You, spoiler, don't have to have a newsletter. You have to encourage people to subscribe to a newsletter that you will one day be sending out, but it's great audience discovery. Who's coming to your website? Where are they affiliated with? You can get some interest from them. What are they most interested in as well? So here's some tips about how to find those conversations. SparkToro is a really great audience discovery tool, and you can do 5 free searches, I believe, in a day or in a week or a certain time period. But search your industry, search yourself, see what hashtags people are using. This is going to broaden your view into the world that you're trying to influence and change. And social media, right now, I would encourage no one in this room to be on TikTok. I would encourage you to be very active on Twitter. That's where reporters live. I'd encourage you to be very active on LinkedIn. That's where investors and your colleagues live. The other platforms have use cases that are significant, but oftentimes for early stage founders, a distraction. So once you've activated social, you can move to the next slide, thank you. We're going to engage in conversations. So this is that 2-week, 4-week primer period before you even try to go out for PR. You're going to engage with reporters who are covering that industry because you're tracking hashtags. You're going to comment, which is more valuable than liking or sharing, on social media posts. And you're going to continue that cadence. And the suggestion that we have here is set 15-minute meeting for yourself on a Tuesday and on a Thursday every week, and just spend 15 minutes on social. This isn't a huge time commitment, but if you're doing that twice a week, you're beginning to understand your custom fit into your ecosystem, and you're engaging in conversations that will matter and will pick off in the social media landscape. So this is the know your audience piece, because now that you've worked through all these efforts, we want to reach the reporters who are going to help tell your story. And reporters are often vilified, and they can be pretty grumpy. But I will say, if they don't email back, don't take to it. So thick skin, you're going to be fine. I'm a former journalist more than a decade, and this is what newsrooms look like pre-pandemic. The exasperated person in the back, this checked out person with 2 screens in the foreground. No one's looking at each other. Reporters, go to the next one. Reporters will, let's see if it's here. That last point is really important. We'll get 50 pitches before noon. 50 emails, people wanting them to tell stories that they may or may not want to tell, may not even, they call spray and pray in the PR industry, may not even be for them. It might just be like, maybe we get lucky. We don't practice that at our firm, but it's definitely practiced in the PR industry. So how do you stand out above that static? How do you stand out above that noise? So the reporter will be looking for pitches, and we're going to give details about how you can do that and kind of DIY that pitch. But what we really love is that reporters are becoming more diversified. They are not just an online reporter, they also have a podcast. They're not just a TV host, they also have a column. So we're seeing that if they don't like your story in one form, they may say, this is great, but I'd love to host you on my podcast to talk about it, as opposed to cover it in the story. And then when I was a reporter, I had 2 beats, maybe 3 from time to time. But now the average reporter will have 4 beats. So your biotech reporter might also be your construction reporter, which happens at business journals quite a bit. It might be your real estate reporter and your life science reporter. They might be your economics reporter and your you get the story. So they have a lot of different beats. So you have to be very quick in your emails. All right. So, oh, it's a format there. So where reporters look for stories, you can go right to the next slide. Thank you. So where reporters look for stories, it's Twitter. This is why we've asked you to kind of stand up that presence. They want not to be pitched. They want to discover your story. And that happens. They want to see what's relevant to them because they get, let's say 9 out of 10 potential points if they find a story versus having one pitched to them, because it's much more valid. So you want to create this sense of discovery that they can find you on Twitter, look on your website, look on your LinkedIn, and then reach out to you. So you're creating this really broad canvas for people to find you. And this is where reporters, we call it trading up the chain. But reporters, and I'm guilty of this as well, reporters will look at niche publications or smaller publications to where they're reporting at to try and elevate stories. So as a reporter in Seattle, I'd look at the Kitsap Sun, I'd look at the Tacoma News Tribune, because I knew my audience wasn't seeing all of those stories. So we'll see Wall Street Journal reporters will, we just had a client on, will listen to Mendel's Pod, which is a great podcast in our industry, looking for stories, because discoverability means much more than being pitched. So we want to find and go in those places. So if you get the opportunity to be on a low tier publication, take it, because you're going to use that to move yourself up the chain in the video. I'm just going to pause real quickly because I'm moving through pretty fast. How's everyone doing here?
I had a question.
Yeah.
You're talking about public relations, right?
Mm-hmm.
But so many of the small companies that we're involved with are interested more in partners, investors, sort of, I would call it almost private relations. Are you going to get into that?
Well, I think everything that we're doing here serves that purpose. I think if you're looking at investor relations, if you're looking at partnerships, having a solid foundation when they come to your website, when they look at you on social, they see that we have a client that just signed a partnership. We're thinking about doing a media release, and they were a little hesitant because it's a European company. And then we said, well, their social media presence is 2,000% higher than yours in terms of followers. And now they're suddenly very interested in making big news about this partnership. They're just unaware. So I think having that discoverability and raising awareness of yourself, even if you hard stop there and don't engage with media, you've done yourself a great service for attracting the right partners, having a clear vision that people can become attracted and energized by. So I think if you just stop here and you decide to finish your lunch in peace, you'll have done pretty well.
Eric, we have a question in the chat box. How much in advance of product launch do you want to start being active on social media and getting PR?
So not all product launches are created equal, but I think a good unit of measurement there is we want a good month of heads up before being really active about that outreach. So in that time ahead of your product launch, you'll write a media release, you'll cultivate a media list of media members that you want to engage with, and then you'll prime your social media as well, and maybe write a thought leadership piece about what this means. So there's a few items that you'd want to accomplish in that time frame. You just want to give yourself time to do that. That's great. Coming back here.
You may get into this later, but what about using news wires?
Oh, that's a great question.
Decision wire. That is not.
Yeah.
Can you repeat the question?
Absolutely. Yeah, so the question was about news wires. So news wires, we treat as, there's 3 buckets of media. There's owned media, which is your blog post that you'll write. There's earned media, which is the story you'll get from the blog post that you'll write. And then there's paid media. So that's advertising. And that's where we put news wires as well. So there's a fee associated with it. News wires, we have 3 primary contenders there. So thank you for asking a question that I know a ton about. Yeah, I appreciate that. 3 primary contenders there. You have from top down, PR Newswire, Business Wire, and then Globe Newswire. There's the efficacy from top to bottom. Also pricing from top to bottom. So pricing is often by word count. You can spend about $2,500 to $3,000 on a PR Newswire, and then down to just hundreds on a Globe Newswire. And then you can get packages. So there's some nuance there about how you can exercise that. So the long answer is yes to Newswire. And yes to Newswire, especially on product launch, because you're not going to get the organic pickup that you might necessarily want. Reporters don't often cover products unless they're earth-shattering, but they do cover big ideas, they do cover funding. So with a product launch and a newswire, what that does is it's going to take your verbatim press release, you're going to see no changes to it, and it's going to show up on dozens to hundreds of news sites around the world. Oftentimes we'll get it on Yahoo Finance or Bloomberg, and what that does is increase your SEO. It increases your discoverability, and people are reading your story as it's written on a validated news site, so you have more control over the outbound messaging and the impact of that messaging, and great tracking. So you kind of understand where people are coming from, especially if you have Google Analytics primed into your website.
So related to Bill's question, it used to be that, you know, people would say, well, as a startup, you should focus on IR rather than PR. But I'm sensing that because of social media and its presence, there might have been a little bit of shift towards PR more so than the old IR.
Yeah, and I think you can take, so the question is, you know, focus more on IR or PR, investor relations or public relations. And I think there are different audiences, there's slightly different messages, but if you do hard work on IR, so much of that translates to PR. You're doing, you know, your competitive landscape analysis with, you know, you're in the upper right of the chart. You know, that will tell you your differentiation and how you're different on an X and Y axis. That's really great content to, you know, tweak slightly, update the messaging, but put that out on social and make that discoverable and help identify your lane in your industry. Mark, before we continue, any other messaging triage or PR triage?
I would just echo that this is the same thing. I know job candidates learn along the way that when you apply for a job, the first thing the HR person does is they go Google you, right? And it's the same with companies or investors that you may want to work with. One of the first things they're going to want to do is Google you. And the more active you are in the public relations space, the higher up you come on Google search terms, right? And SEO optimization. So just echoing your comment about that the sort of the plan, how you want to, and you want to think long and hard about how you want to appear to the market in the different phases of potentially your investing, your funding phases, if you will. And there might be very different messages in each of those phases that you want to have be that public facing piece there. So and there's also just I just want to throw in too, there's much more economical wire service. There's a great one here in Oregon we use that is also national, but just food for thought too.
Yeah. There's a few different, there's EIN and there's others. So there's an exploration there for sure. And my email address is somewhere if you want some candid commentary on Newswire, is very happy to offer it.
Just to follow on what Bill was saying earlier on, if the IR/PR issue and the timing question, if the PR aspect should really only launch a month or two before your product's ready to launch, there's a big discrepancy between that and the investor relations where you're not launching for maybe 2 years because you need the funding to get you to the launching phase. So it seems to be you kind of getting ahead of yourself to do a PR thing if it's going to be 1 or 2 years out before you actually going to launch your product.
Yeah, and how I take that, I decouple product from company. I think if you have a product launch, you want that month time frame. If you have a company, we'll often encourage, and we've seen some benefit from this. If you're thinking of closing your round in January of next year, think about a little bit of a PR push, thought leadership piece. Try to be much more active on social, and that will help you on the IR side as well. So there's, and I hope I wasn't unclear in that, but there is a product, but there's also the company, the startup, and the founders as well. And I'd approach each of those with a different PR strategy.
And there may be legal ramifications with Securities and Exchange Commission. So if you looked at for example, take a local example, AppSci, right? AppSci promoted and published when they got each funding round.
Mm-hmm.
And that was different than product launches. So, AppSci's theory, if I can read their PR correctly, is that every time they got funded, that's a little bit more the marketplace having confidence in them as a company, and then they get funded again and they announce it. So they made a lot of hay, and that was, you know, based on really good relationships with their investors. So some investors may want to say, yeah, you can promote this, you know, you can publicize this funding round, but don't mention our name or whatever. Some investors want to be like, yeah, let's do a joint announcement. I mean, it can run the gamut. So the more investment, and you begin to have confidence, and I use the app size because I feel like in the last 2 years, every time I open my email, like at least once a month, they were signing some major partnership or getting some Series A around, or, you know, whatever they were doing. But that was intentional part of strategy to build confidence in their company going down the road. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Oh, no problem. We
Sorry.
often will,
I'll be quiet now.
but then the funding rounds, we'd absolutely announce those. And then we get an investor quote to go along with it, and we mainline into their context as well. We actually see really good reporter outreach to investors directly to identify who are the top biotechs, and we had one of those this year. You know, top 20 biotechs to look for in 2023. And then reporters will go directly to investors for that. So you want to make sure you're very high profile among your investor set as well.
Have you used the same methodology as a precursor to crowdfunding campaigns?
We don't often work in the crowdfunding space. Crowdfunding is a slightly different animal. There's a lot more social media horsepower that has to go into that than traditional media. Although they're very closely tied and augmented, but that becomes much more of a social media play and social credibility play than traditional venture capital funding. Oh, thanks. All right, so this is coming back to it. So this is more about knowing your audience, and this is where reporters will look for news stories before tracking. And we talked about trading up the chain, but this is just validation from one of the services that we use called Muckrack, which is our list building service. We really actually enjoy the service quite a bit. They just raised a $180 million Series A. Speaking of funding, which is this hyper aggressive Series A. So this is some of the research that they've compiled and that we leverage every day. And then social media just plays a role in their ecosystem, especially Twitter. So pitching best practices. So all right, so you've identified. We'll get into the who a little bit later on. This is, if you're writing a pitch, this is the slide that you want to refer to. So we're emailing or direct messaging via Twitter. A little bit different, but emailing, headline 10 words or less. So I have a 0.7 second rule. If we can't engage a reporter in less than 1 second, they're not going to read it, which is true. 200 words or less, and use hyperlinks as needed. So you have your paper's just been published in Nature. You're not going to talk a lot about it. You can give one sentence, you're going to link to it. All the way in the back, question.
Question came in chat. When using Twitter, should you use company account, personal, or both when preparing to launch?
I love that question because the answer is both, and you're going to weave those together to amplify the impact. Oftentimes, we'll post on Twitter, and then we'll have the CEO retweet with comment, and then you get a little bit of both. So you're going to play those two off each other. Your biggest engagement is going to not come from your company page, it's going to come from your CEO page or founder page. So think about that as well when you're thinking about how much awareness do you want to build, how big of an impact, because some announcements are best if they come from a CEO and then are retweeted or shared via LinkedIn. And there's a little bit of delicacy there, but the answer is typically both. But sometimes we see, if you have a new hire announcement, we post that on LinkedIn or a company Twitter page, and then we'd have the CEO or founder retweet or share that with a welcome to the team sort of post. That's a use case example. Hope that answers the question.
So I have a question about this for the last slide. So you're talking about hyperlinking to something. What if it's a brand new story, like you're targeting one of those lower tier, maybe like more specialized publications? Would you send them like copy to put in, or would you, or how would let them kind of decide if they want to interview you or something?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. So I get to finish the rest of the bullet points on my slide. So thank you very much. So you're going to frame the story. So it's not just 200 words or less, but you're going to give them the why, and not just the why they have to cover, but the why now piece. News. This is going to be pretty obvious real fast. The first 3 letters of news. So that's what you want to cultivate in your story. Why is this new? A new company isn't new. A new product isn't new, but your approach to disrupting your industry is new. Your team and what they can do together is new. So think about the new piece in there, and then the why they must cover it. So let's think of a use case. So phages, which are organisms that infect bacteria. There are more phages on Earth than grains of sand. So a very big population, we know almost nothing about it. So we are pitching an event for a client that's working in phages. And we kind of went through some of those big picture stats that you just heard. For every grain of sand on Earth, there are 1 trillion phages. Phage therapy is evolving, and we're able to engage with and cultivate reporters at pretty top tier publications because we're letting them see and understand something they didn't know previously. So if you can take something obscure and make it relatable, the grain of sand example is good. 1 trillion phages for every grain of sand. Allow them to see it in a way that makes sense to them and contextualize it. Then you're able to start moving that forward. And then the why now piece. Sometimes we'll add some gating mechanisms or accelerating mechanisms to emails that will be doing a news release about this in a month. We'd love for you to have the story first. So put a little bit of motivation there for them to tell the story sooner rather than later. So think about the finesse there. How can I also answer your question with that feeling?
No, I think that pretty much answers it.
You wouldn't write the whole story, maybe
Yeah.
dig in. You wouldn't write the story for them. You'd tell them what the story is about. And then you'd use those hyperlinks if they're like, it's about phages, and then link to an article about phages that they understand or see as valid from a reputable source. And then here's our perspective on that, and then give them the view. So, but that's why we practice it. There is a little bit of an art form to it, and then catching the right reporter who's worked in that space before. Ed Young, if you're familiar, won a Pulitzer recently. He's covered phages exhaustively 3 years ago, but hasn't covered them since because of the pandemic. So kind of knowing your audience is important too. Okay, good. All right.
What's the 99?
Oh, okay, thank you. So as a practicing PR person, as someone who writes for a living, as someone who was a journalist, I care 90% about the subject line. Like if I were to care about anything the most, it's those 7 to 10 words in your subject line. 90%. I won't, because if they don't read the subject line and like it, they're not going to read the first sentence, which I care 9% about. The rest of it is 1% because you've already got them. So you want to follow through. You want to, of course, be, professional and well crafted. But if they don't like the subject line, they're not going to open the email. If they don't like that first sentence, they're not going to read the second. So if I can get them to the second sentence, I have them. Especially if they can see that it's short. If they see that they have to scroll a lot, that's why it's 200 words. You're going to lose them there. But 200 words, you get them to the second sentence, you got them. Weirdly, we can track a lot of that. So we can track opens and we can track read times. So you want a story, you got to make sure that you're also ready to respond. This is from Chuck Klosterman, who I really like. He's a rock and roll journalist. He wrote Sex, Drugs, and Cocoa Puffs. You should read it. It's delightful. So the news story is determined only by who the reporter emails and who emails back first. That's it. I've lost out on stories because I've been 2 minutes late to email. That's just how that works. So if I can't reply to a story in 5 minutes or less, which is why someone's monitoring my email inbox, we might lose it. So just be ready to reply very quickly and make sure you're that person. And how are they going to email you? They're going to have found you online. They're going to have thought something you wrote on Twitter was silly and prescient about your technology. They're going to see your website and think, all right, these people are raising money. I need to engage with them because they just closed their A or their C, so they're going to be raising it again. So think about how much I never sleep, and also about how you should be quick to respond if a reporter emails. So this is report for TechCrunch that we work with from time to time, but also, we emailed Devin a few times about this article that he missed because he was busy, and then he saw it in another publication and then wanted to follow the company because of it. So you're starting to form relationships with reporters if you choose to embark on this road. And you want to make sure that you not only respond immediately, but, and this is just an ultimate pet peeve, but if you say, I can't do it today or interview today, give them a time later that afternoon or the next day. Don't think about weeks, think about days. Reporters are under deadline. They're accountable for producing X amount of stories per day. As a radio reporter, I had to do more than 10 stories a day. So think about like the volume that some reporters have to push. You don't want to be a roadblock to that. You want to help them in their job because they're going to help you raise your awareness. And then the next slide. So who to pitch, preparing for your media interview. You can, let's see, strategy. This is just what we're going to go through, tips and tricks, and then the follow-up. So there's a lot of words here. So this is what you've done. So if you just tuned in now, you're going to get the whole presentation in about 2 minutes. So you've already primed your website, your messaging, you've written a thought piece, you've adapted your messaging to social, you've been active on social, you're monitoring yourself and your competitors, and you're ready for this PR moment. So strategy for early stage media pitching. If you're in Portland or around Portland, think about the Portland Business Journal. They have a reporter who just works on this. Think about, there's often built-ins. There's a built-in Seattle that covers widely. Puget Sound Business Journal also covers widely. Think about local. This is where you're going to have the most gravity to attract media attention. But local, there's also freelancers who live in Portland who write for larger publications. They'll have much more of a sense of what you're accomplishing because they live here and your place in the ecosystem as well. So think about, can you find a freelancer who writes for Modern Healthcare, excuse me, and then think about niche podcasts. I mentioned Mendel's Pod. There's also La Biotech is a great, relatively new podcast that covers biotechs. We do 4 biotechs podcasts, 15 minutes each. Let me grab a quick drink. We can go to the next slide. All right, strategy for early stage media pitching. What's that tipping point? I often say that we're not storytellers, we're more story finders. So we'll often be in meetings with CEOs and founding teams, and they'll just casually mention something. And then we'll say that's the story. Our Phage client, we have the largest Phage host interaction database in the world. That's kind of a news story. Previously, there were only 300 known interactions. Now they have thousands, so they get to kind of ascend to this level. So that's a story. Funding, as we mentioned, great story. Partnerships, intellectual properties, IP, you're growing your team. And this is where you have life science reporters, you're also real estate reporters. Business journals, that's their audience. So if you're moving into a new space, they want to know that because their audience, there are a lot of real estate individuals that also want to know that for lead gen. So there's kind of playing that game. But a new office is a great place for you to reach out to a reporter, let them know you're leasing space and you're building this office. It's also a great milestone for your company. Clinical trials, clearly, and this is a thought leadership piece, subject matter expertise. What do you know that no one else knows? What vision do you have that no one else has? How can you offer that to a reporter? Oftentimes, I'm sure you've done this. You've seen a story, you thought they missed that. This is the point that they didn't get. Here's how they could have told a better story. And you have that information. The reporter wants to know that. They want to tell a better story. So you can email the reporter with that perspective, following those same guidelines, 200 words or less, hyperlinks, make them care. So exercise your expertise in the media as well.
Can I just add something too quick? I ran this little experiment a few years ago, and I found that anytime I put the word emerging in a pitch, it always got picked up. And it's that news of this is new, this is really wonderful. I'd love to hear your thought about I've had really good luck there. We have one biotech reporter, and I do encourage people to get to know Elizabeth Hayes at the Portland Business Journal. And I do that for 2 reasons. Number one, she's the only biotech reporter anywhere in our state, the only dedicated biotech reporter. And the other thing I would also encourage you to get to know her is because when she writes a story for the Portland Business Journal, it automatically syndicates throughout, I think, 40 markets in the United States. So you've got a really good syndication opportunity there as well. So it means your story gets a life additionally beyond, even just our own metro area. But I wanted to ask you a question. Do you have much luck in inviting reporters out? I know it not during the pandemic because we were all working remotely, but inviting them out to look at your space for, to sit in your lab or to sit with you as you're making daily decisions. And, if you have a story to pitch around it, invite the reporter to come out and see your space, even if it's a small lab. I mean, it's like you may not think your space is really much, but think of the great technology that's even coming out of this small space or whatever. Do you have much luck in inviting reporters to meet with you in person?
We occasionally, when we get reporters, sometimes they'll want to come out. If you're familiar with the Timmerman report, we had a Timmerman interview a client, and it was the first time since the pandemic he had come to see a lab or be in person. But typically, if we invite reporters out, unless you have a nuclear accelerator or you can levitate a unicorn, you're going to have a real hard time getting them because of their workload. Also, if you can levitate a unicorn as well. But I think it's so difficult. Events are the same way. Trying to get reporters to events, very difficult because it doesn't really meet that new threshold. Unless you're unveiling something, there's ways you can engineer it. But if you have something hyper cool that they've never seen before, you want to show them. If you've established a relationship, and then you can parlay that into, on a weekend stop by, or make it a very light touch, you might have some impact there. We haven't had much luck, and we do have a client opening a new lab we think might be cool enough. We still need to check that out. But good point. All right, and so this already. This is the leveraging and pitching. So that's just a review. Go to the next one. So, all right, congratulations, it worked. You got it. Now, buckle in. So we write media briefings before we engage with a reporter, before we coordinate an interview. So this is kind of what we cover in that media briefing. So you're going to know the reporter, the publication, what have they covered previously. Ours is a one-pager and has 3 links to stories they've covered recently. Just think about knowing them and then run through the conversation, always on the record. Encourage you to not tip your hand on anything that you wouldn't want in publication. The reporters we have, when we have founders do that, they're often very gracious and they don't kind of divulge any trade secrets. But we'd rather be safe than sorry. Review, choose your 3 points. This is probably from your pitch. Why is it new? Why does it matter now? How are you different and unique? Make your three points there. And then kind of run through a draft Q&A. It doesn't have to be exhaustive. You still want to feel as though it's a conversation. You're not reading. Don't write out your answers and read them, but make sure it's a conversation. And then some other items. I encourage my clients to stand up when they're having those conversations, just because it's going to give them a little more energy and make them a little more engaged. And the rest of you can read. There's one good point. Almost every last question in a media interview is there anything else I missed or anything else you'd like to add? And if there isn't, you're just going to talk. Don't say, nope, we'll talk to you later. Revisit those 3 main points again, because you're going to say them in a slightly different and more engaging way because it's the last thing you're saying. So the top 5 tips here for your interview. Brevity is going to be your friend if you're talking for more than a minute. Now think about pausing and giving them an opportunity to ask a question. If they're asking you about a problem, tell them about a solution. Don't kind of fall down that well. And little things that drive us nuts, we just had it with an Axios reporter yesterday, but be on time for the interview. Our CEO was 10 minutes late. The reporter was great. And the interview went very well. Speak clearly, avoid jargon. If you don't know, this is a tough one, especially for scientists. If you don't know, say you don't know. And then, but follow up, make sure you can get them the answer that they want to hear. And then little things are on there as well. You can review this later, but avoid swivel chairs, stand up, you saw that, thank the reporter, and then ask them when they're going to publish. So swivel chairs are just distracting in general. Yeah, you're going to swivel because you're going to be slightly nervous. You're going to start swiveling. So I was a TV news reporter, so we always will put people in chairs that you can swivel. Otherwise, they're in focus, they're out of focus, in focus, out of focus. You still might not get the story. It's a heartbreaker, it might not happen. We've been 22 emails and 4 interviews in with the New York Times, and we haven't gotten stories. It just doesn't happen sometimes. It doesn't mean the reporter doesn't like you. It doesn't mean your story is not valid. It means it wasn't the right time. So keep up those relationships, and you've kind of got a little bit of equity in that relationship now. So make sure that you leverage that smartly. Go to the next slide. So you're going to follow up even if you don't get the story. You're going to use social media amplification. We're going to walk through these, and then there's some sneaky ways in which we can do that. But you're going to have a new best friend. And I hope everyone here is wearing this chain, because that means you have a best friend out there. But you're going to have a new best friend, and you're going to follow up with the reporter. And reporters, if you go a few slides back, we don't need to, but if you go a few slides back, you'll see that reporters track their social media amplification. How often was their story shared? Did they comment on it? Did they thank me? Did they share it on their channels? That matters to reporters. And there's kind of an unwritten rule that you're gauged by it as well. Less unwritten and more spoken out loud in newsrooms, because that matters. So like and share the coverage, thank them, and then don't stop there in your email because you have them. You're thanking them. Use the next sentence. Say, I'd love to be a resource if you're covering X or Y topic. Think about that. And then continue to like and share their content even after your story goes. And if you have a good friend who has a unique perspective, offer them up to the reporter. Be a resource. Reporters just don't want to hear about your story. They also want to hear about the broader ecosystem. So think about it. That's why it's called public relations, where it's a relationship. And then I think we covered about pitching those broader stories. Social media amplification, we're running up on time, so I'll be really quick here. You're going to post on social, you're going to tag, but comments, especially on LinkedIn, mean more than sharing and liking. So comment and then share. So you're really helping the reporter, but sharing means something. Don't share once. We talked earlier about having a library book. 2 weeks later, add a different perspective. Since the story X or Y has happened, 6 weeks later, share again. In case you missed it, we really like this quote. And pull out a quote from the story, but make it new and fresh. You have something, use it again. And then here's some other use cases that we find less used, but we find very effective. So we talked about newsletter sign up on your website. Now you got some content for it. Use it in a newsletter. Also, put it on your blog, write a little commentary about, here's something else that wasn't in the story that we think is important. Write a paragraph or two, link to the first few, copy and paste the first couple paragraphs from the story. Nice image, and then link to the story on its native website. Important.
The Portland Business Journal though is paywalled.
Yeah.
So you can't share their stories. But what I have done is I call the reporter Elizabeth and I ask her if she's going to amplify the story on social, on her LinkedIn or her social. And if she does, then we can go ahead and
That's
share
smart.
that. But a lot of stories are paywalled.
Yeah, we will
Luke
mark
Timmerman's
paywall on that.
paywall. They're almost all paywall now.
What we'll do, and it doesn't violate, we'll take an image of the headline.
Yeah.
And we'll use that as the image to draw people in, and then we'll do a little bit of scene setting for the story, and then we'll link to it and note that it's paywall. And you still get the credit. That still matters. People still know your place there. Okay. Why are we doing this? Is there a monetary value? There is. Here it is. So we use ad value equivalency. So should you have tried to pay for ad placements that reach the same number of people? That's one of the metrics that PR used to show value. What will it have cost? And it would cost a lot. It would cost a lot. I think currently, trying to think where it was. It was in Business Insider, now known as Insider. A media pop there would cost you $500,000 if you wanted to advertise and get that same space and same UVM as unique views monthly or unique visitors monthly. To reach that same amount of people, it would cost you that much money. So there's a payoff, there's an equivalent value to it. And this is just one of the units of measurement, but it's also the value isn't just that you didn't pay for it, it's that a reporter validated it. And you kind of went through that thought process. And then you get to use it again. I think this is our last slide at time. Thank you. The email's there. If you have questions or follow-ups, very, very open to zing off quick emails. know we're running over, but happy to take questions if that works for you.
Questions?
Yeah, you talked about social media. You didn't talk much about events like the JP Morgan Investor Conference and all the bio conferences out there. When should a startup be aware and start to engage in these things?
So we like events. JP Morgan is a show. You know, it's very theatrical. There's a lot of voices in the room. How we approach events is we will try to do speaker submissions. We want our clients to speak at events. The rest of it tends to fall more into kind of a marketing camp. So if we can get them a speaking engagement, which often will get them in for free and give them some perks, we will do that. So that's how we see a value to events, get them on a panel, but broadly events, we track them, and then how we use events. If we have maybe even a poster presentation at an event, at a client in Europe had a poster presentation around phages, and we're able to net some reporters because of that. So we'll use that as a peg to engage reporters if they're revealing, the client is revealing something new and interesting at the event. So we don't leverage hard on events, but we do see them as valuable opportunities for speaking engagements if we can get the reporter nudged in the right spot there.
If you go to bio and you register to go to bio, you can ask them for their media list. So you'll find the reporters. That's what we did with Oregon Bio here in June when we went to the Bio International Conference. They gave us the entire media list. So you can email the reporters ahead of time, and JP Morgan may be willing to do that. They may be willing to share their media list of the media that's either A, invited, or B, is confirmed to attend. And then that's a great opportunity to pick up the phone call and say, hey, you know, John, I'm gonna be here at JP Morgan. We're unveiling some pretty interesting stuff. I'd love to meet with you and talk with you about it. So that's another option as well.
Yeah, that's smart. No,
Yeah.
so media lists are great. We've definitely had benefit with that. Sometimes they're gated behind a price point, but oftentimes
They can.
her asking is, there's nothing wrong with asking that.
Any online questions? Any other in-person questions? All right, well, thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Eric. We really appreciate you being here.